again, year 10. So, demo number 2 for you guys. We're continuing with our development of our knowledge of pastry. So far we have done short crust pastry with our quiche. It's used for savoury products, half fat to flour ratio. Last week we looked at rough puff pastry, which is an equal ratio, it's 1 to 1. So if we had 200 grams of flour, we use 200 grams of fat. The importance of using so much fat is that it melts away when we cook the pastry, leaving behind air pockets which expand and make the pastry flaky. This is also enhanced by doing that laminating process. Okay, that is a really, really important practical that you should have watched. If you haven't watched it, you need to go back and watch that lamination process. It's a key part in GCSE food and you need to be sure what you're talking about with that key word, okay? So rough puff pastry. Today we are looking at sweet crust pastry. So it's really similar to short crust, but it would be used for sweet tart as opposed to savoury tarts. So we're making a chocolate tart today. You don't have to use sweet crust for this. You could use short crust, that would be fine. But sweet crust has a slightly different texture. It's even shorter and crumblier than short crust pastry is. It is quite difficult to work with, even more difficult than short crust and rough puff. Okay, so this can be quite difficult to work with, and it just requires practice, okay, as all these pastries do. So, to start with, we're going to make the pastry first of all. We're going to blind bake it exactly as we did with the quiche we cooked that time. So, the measurement I would like you to use is 200 grams of 250 grams of plain flour to start. So get that in your bowl. This process is the same as making the short crust, the start of this. I'm going to get the fat and the flour in there and then rub them in to shorten the gluten. So 250 grams of flour. Try and be specific and precise. There we go, that'll do. And then we want 125 grams of fat, okay? Try and use proper butter, okay? Proper unsalted butter. It is more expensive than just margarine, but the final product is worth it. So 125 grams. You'll notice that 125 is half of 250. So it's half fat to flour again. Okay, so butter goes in. Make sure you're putting it in nice little lumps. Okay, this makes the rubbing in process a little bit easier. And make sure everything is as cold as possible. Okay, you don't want this butter to be melting away and turn into liquid while you're fiddling about with it. So 125. 125 is fine. So then you can start your rubbing in process, okay? Remember with short crust, we're using the tips of our fingers to try and keep that butter as cool as possible and not let it melt away into a liquid. Okay, and you are rubbing it into the flour. So as we talked about with the short crust practical, this process is called shortening. We are rubbing in, and as we are rubbing in, we are shortening the gluten that's in the flour. Gluten, like we talked about before with bread, makes things really stretchy. That's good for bread, that's what we want. We want it a little bit for puff pastry because we want the puff pastry to be able to stretch as it rises. But for short crust and sweet crust, we don't want gluten. So you're rubbing in, shortening that gluten. The reason that happens is because as we rub the butter over the flour, we create a waterproof layer. We create a waterproof layer on the flour, which means when we add our liquid, the gluten can't get out to the water and the water can't get into the gluten. It creates like a barrier, keeping that gluten short. Okay, so this process can take a bit of time, and if your butter's cold, it takes even longer. So I'll speed this bit up. So what you're looking for is a breadcrumb texture. Okay, something like that. Now, well, not like this, because actually you can see I've got lots of big lumps of butter in there. Okay, keep on going a little bit longer. Some of those lumps that look like butter might actually just be clumps of flour clumping together. So just give it a little squish. Okay, nearly there. So it's worth making sure all the butter's mixed in to this pastry. If it isn't, you'll have those big lumps of butter when you're rolling it out when it goes into the oven. That then melts away and leaves an air pocket. We don't want that with a tart pastry. We want it with rough puff. We don't want it with this. We want it to be a nice solid structure so we can fill it with all of our fillings. Right, so that's done. What I'm also going to add into here to make it sweet crust is some sugar. Now I think I'll change this maybe. You can use caster sugar if you want, or you can use icing sugar. I prefer to use icing sugar because it gives the pastry a better texture. Because it's finer, it just makes the pastry a bit more melt in the mouth. Caster sugar is okay, it just takes a little bit longer to dissolve, which can make it a little bit grainy. But either is acceptable, either's fine. I think icing sugar is the best. So 125 grams of icing sugar. That's it. And again, you can just rub that into it and taste it. Okay, make sure there's no big lumps of sugar in there. There we go. So, that's what you're looking for, okay? A nice pale, fine breadcrumb texture. What you're going to do then is, instead of water to this, we're actually going to add egg. So we're going to add 3 egg yolks to this. You can add water if you want to, but egg yolks just make it a little bit richer and a little bit more indulgent. Because it's fat as well, and gluten doesn't like fat, it keeps the pastry even shorter. I'm just going to rinse my hands before I sort the eggs out. So water is fine, eggs are even better. Okay. Thank you, miss. So you want the yellow part to this. It's not as specific like with meringue when we only want the white. We're allowed to get some white in there if we want to. But preferably, that's then going to alter the amount of liquid that goes in. Oh, sugar. You just want it. You just want the yolk, really. There we go. Okay, pop that in. Okay, 3 egg yolks is a guide. Eggs can come in all different sizes. You can get smaller ones, you can get absolutely massive ones. So what you might find is that even with your 3 egg yolks that you've said, you might need a little bit more liquid. If that's the case, you can just add a little bit more water. Or you could break another egg, beat it in a bowl, and then add it bit by bit, okay? So, 3 egg yolks are in there. Then we're going to get involved with it, break them up a little bit, okay? And you're going to start bringing this pastry dough together, okay? So using one hand. Now it does get a bit squishy because it's egg yolk, so it's quite fatty, it goes quite gloopy. Okay? But just bear with it and keep on bringing it together. So try to handle it as little as possible. If we start heating this up and melting the butter, all the butter's going to melt out of it. Then the gluten can be released and it makes our pastry quite stretchy, which we don't want. Okay, so I'm a bit concerned it's a little bit sticky, so I'm just going to dry it out with a little bit of flour. Okay, and then that's that. If you're concerned about the heat of it, you can put it into the fridge at this stage, just to take the temperature down a little bit. But I'm okay with that. I'm going to roll mine straight out as it is. Okay, all the excess, just rub your hands together and it should all come off. Right, so we're going to roll the pastry out now. So dust your surface with flour. This can be quite sticky, so you may want a fair amount of flour. Okay, get it down. And then very gently, you need to be really gently with this pastry. Start rolling this pastry out. Okay, now if it starts to stick to the rolling pin, just dust the rolling pin off. Like we talked about with quiche, this is really short, this pastry. If I try and pick this up, that weight is going to be too much and it's going to split. So what I suggest you do is put the rolling pin in the middle of the pastry, fold that over and then lift the rolling pin up. Okay, it just takes the weight of the pastry because it can't hold itself. So we're going to roll this out until it's big enough to go into my tart tin. We did this with quiche, so put the tart tin on top. Okay, if it looks like there's enough and enough excess to go up the edges, then you're pretty much done. Okay, so I probably just want it a little bit longer. That should be fine. There, perfect. Okay, make sure you put your bottom back in the pastry. I had that before. Then, like we just did, take the edge of the pastry and roll it over. It is really brittle, it is really delicate, okay? This is why it's more difficult than just a normal short crust. Lift up the rolling pin and then you're going to line that tin. So lay that pastry in there. Okay, be really gentle. Lift the pastry and then fit it into the edges. Now if it breaks, that's okay. I could just see, you can't see it, but mine is breaking at the edges because it's so short. We can just patch that up a bit later on. Okay, so get it in. Don't forget to lift it. If you just start jabbing it in, then you're just going to make holes in it. Okay. Roll your rolling pin over the top. Make sure it's well in there. And then you can see, look, I've like cut it off at the top. If you take that bit of pastry, then you can just patch it up. Okay, that doesn't matter. Right. Then we're going to pierce the bottom with a fork. That then stops the, I've got one, I had one. Oh, I dropped it on the floor. It's down there. There we go, there it is. Oh. We're going to pierce the bottom with the fork. What that stops happening is it stops the base rising up. Now we are obviously going to put our baking beans in here, but it's just an extra precaution we can take. Just making sure, taking some time to make sure my pastry case is nice and neat. Okay, so what we need to start looking at in year 10 is obviously just making sure, you might be able to make some decent pastry, just making sure that finish is really neat and professional. That's going to get you some higher grades. Okay, all of that excess can go in the bin. It seems like a lot, but obviously it depends how big your pastry case is. So with a fork, we're just gently going to pierce the bottom of it. Try not to go all the way through the case. Just kind of make an indentation in it. Just like that. Okay. Then you're going to make a cartouche. So a cartouche is just a circle bit of greaseproof paper. So if you get some greaseproof, you can Just put some greaseproof in like that and that's fine. But there's a lot of greaseproof paper flying around in the oven then. So if you cut off a square or a rectangle, take one corner and you're going to fold it in half, like a triangle. So you end up with something like that. Okay. Now watch this carefully, because this is really easy to get wrong, and I did it wrong a lot when I was first starting doing it. So along this straight side here, okay, where there's no opening, you are going to fold it along there. Okay, so I'm now folding that in half again. Then I have a little shape like that. Okay, now keep your finger on this right angle here. That's the key, to keep your finger on the triangle. When I first started doing it, I would keep my finger here and try and do the next lot of folds. That doesn't work. You need to keep your finger on the right angle. And then keep folding it in half. Make sure you've got some really nice, crisp fold lines. Fold it in half again. Okay, and this little shape will just get smaller and smaller. Ah, no, I said something wrong with the right angle, didn't I? Because that's now the right angle, we don't want our finger there. What we want is, we want it so it's always where the sealed edge is, okay? Don't go at these open edges. So, like I did, we folded it in half. Okay, sealed edge, fold it in half along there. Sealed edge, fold it in half along there. Sealed edge, not these two. Fold it again. And then fold it one more time. Okay, so you end up with something that looks like that. The only way to do it is just to practice, okay? You won't understand if you're just trying to watch me doing it, but I suggest you practice with it. So you end up with something like that. Then you're gonna measure the radius of the tart tin. Is that the one that goes from the middle outwards? Okay, how big it is. And then trim off all of that excess. You want that part, open it up. Then you've got your circle. That can go in. And then you want as many baking beans as you can get in. With the quiche practical, some of you are putting like half your tub of baking beans in. Put as many as you can in there, please. Okay. Just to weigh that pastry down. If you've only got 4 baking beans floating around the bottom of the tin, it's not going to weigh anything down, is it? Okay. Put your baking beans in, and then this is going to go into the oven for about 10 minutes or so. After 10 minutes, we're going to take it out of the oven, and we are going to take the baking beans out and then put it back in to get a bit of colour in. But I'll show you all that in a second. So into an oven, about 180 degrees for 10 to 15 minutes, please. So while your pastry case is in the oven cooking, you can start to prepare your filling. Now for this, I recommend you use 400 grams of dark chocolate. Now it does depend a little bit on how deep your tart tins are. For the tart tin that I had, you probably will, or if it's a particularly wide one, you probably want 400. If you know that your tart tin is smaller and narrower, you probably won't need that much filling. So you can just half all these ingredients if you want to. When it comes to using chocolate, I recommend for cooking that you use the best quality chocolate you can find, especially if it's going into something like a tart. So I'm using Tesco's Finest 85%. Now I know a lot of you don't maybe like dark chocolate, but once we've got the cream and the butter and the vanilla extract and sugar in there, it's not going to taste like just biting down on a bit of just dark chocolate, okay? If you want to use milk chocolate, that's okay. Please just make sure you're using a good quality cooking one. Ideally, you want to use nothing less than 70% cocoa, okay? 70% cocoa is the stuff you want to cook with. All that means is that there's less fat in there, meaning that it won't separate and curdle so easily. I don't know if you've noticed, if some of you tried to melt chocolate before, you might have tried to melt like a bar of dairy milk and it's seized, it's gone really tough, and it's not spreadable at all. It's not very nice and melty. Using something like this, make sure that doesn't happen, okay? So you're going to break this into small pieces. Make sure this is in small chunks, please. You want it to be in small chunks so that when we can melt it later, it all melts evenly. In a saucepan, you want 400 grams of double cream. Make sure it's double cream, please, not single cream. That doesn't want to open, does it? Single cream won't set properly. Okay, you want to use double cream. So 400 grams. If your tart tin's shallow and you're half and everything, you can just use 200 grams. So I'm using 300 because that's all the chocolate I had. Okay, double cream in there. That'll do. Icing sugar. 100 grams of icing sugar. Just use 70. That can go into your double cream as well. Remember to zero the scales. Just a little bit of butter can be melted in here too, so I put 50 grams on there. Okay, if you're half in it, it's going to be 25. It just adds a little bit more richness to it. Obviously, this is really healthy, this recipe. And then you want some vanilla extract in there. Now, you can put any flavour you want in here. I'm just doing a plain one today. If you wanted to make yours like a mint chocolate filling, you can buy some peppermint flavour in. If you wanted it chocolate orange, obviously you can, in here, zest a bit of orange and then put a little bit of juice in there too. Cherry liqueur. I know you can't buy liqueur from a shop, but cherry would work really well in here as well. Dark chocolate and cherry is a nice flavour to have together. But I'm just doing your bog standard vanilla one. So I suggest we're going to go 3 capfuls of vanilla. Sorry. This goes in the heat until the butter is melted, the icing sugar has dissolved, and the double cream has just come to the boil. Don't let it boil forever because it'll evaporate. Okay, so it's just come to the boil. Let's check this little fella. Make your pastry in the meantime. What you want is it to just get a colour just on the outside. Just organise this a little bit better. You don't want to get too much colour, otherwise when it goes back in the oven, the outside is going to burn. So you just want it to start to develop a little bit of colour. I'm actually going to put it in for another 2 minutes, then I'm going to take the baking beans out, okay? Okay, when your cream has just come to the boil and the butter and the icing sugar is all melted, you're going to start to pour it over this chocolate. Okay, so I would add just a little bit of cream to get you started. And what you will see is that all that chocolate will begin to melt. Okay, keep on moving it. You can then add the rest of your cream once it's all of an even temperature. Get it all in. Start to mix it all up. If you haven't got your cream to a boiling temperature, what might happen is it might not just melt all of that chocolate in there, and you might end up with some lumps of chocolate. And obviously we want this to be a nice smooth texture all throughout. So it might look a bit weird to start with, okay, but as you keep mixing it, that will start to become a smoother mixture. Now at the moment it's really, really hot, which means it's obviously a liquid. As this cools, it will start to set, so you don't want to do your chocolate too early. Now in the break, the little editing cut I'd done, I had taken the baking beans out of the tart tin and I've put it back in the oven, okay, just to get an extra bit of colour, because that's not going back in the oven. So what you don't want, unlike our quiche, we took the tart tins out, we put the filling in, put it back in the oven, the pastry had more time to cook. This doesn't go back in the oven as it is, okay, it goes into the fridge to set. So you want to make sure that pastry is fully cooked around the outside. So put it back in when the baking beans are out and make sure your pastry is cooked. Now you can leave this a little while, it won't take that long to set. It will take a little while to set, so you can leave it a minute, okay, while you wait for your pastry to cook. If you are concerned you've done it too early, you might just want to get it over like this, but over maybe just some low steaming water just to keep it warm. Let's check on the pastry. Okay, so pretty much there. Started to puff up a little bit in there. That steam will escape. I think we're there. Okay, so that's what you're looking for. You're looking for a really, really light colour on the outside. And the oven, I'll keep it on for the next thing. Then, all you have to do is take your chocolate filling and you're going to pour it straight into your case. Look at that. Okay. So pour that all in. As much from the bowl as you can. And you can save the rest to clean out by eating it later. Make sure it's nice and neat, make sure it's all even over the tart case. Okay, that then goes into the fridge to set. Okay, if you want to leave it on the side because you're concerned about how hot that still is, you might want to leave it on the side for 20 minutes or so just to cool and then put it into the fridge. This will probably take about 2 hours to set, maybe longer depending on how big it is and how thick it is. When it's set, what you can do if you want to add a bit more decorations, we talked about being professional, you could maybe even melt some white chocolate and then drizzle that on top, but do that after it's set. If you do that now, the white chocolate's just going to sink in and it's going to look a bit of a mess. And then obviously you can garnish with strawberries, with cherries, with some orange peel, depending on what flavour you've got in there, okay? You can serve with custard, and then you can serve with cream or ice cream, whatever you want. And then that's chocolate tart. Do your form, speak to you later.